Hi, class. It's me and my friend John here today. Well, this is just a picture of John. This is John Sherman. His friends call him Smiling John. You can see why. And look at those mutton chop whiskers. I mean, look at those things. We're going to talk about John. Well, we're going to talk about something John did. John was the senator from the state of Illinois. Have you heard of the Sherman Antitrust Act? This is John Sherman. Okay, well, hi there. We're going to talk about another piece of the environment. We did competition, and now we're going to do a little thing on the legal, political, governmental legal environment. And so where we are in the textbook is around chapter 3, page 70 to 72, bottom of 70 to 72. And we're going to be following this outline right here. There it is. The government legal environment. Why is government involved in business? How is government involved in business? And that's we're looking at federal government involved in business. And so these two topics, why and how government's involved in business, they're kind of a preamble, a warm-up. Could you put down your pencils and pens when I do this preamble, this warm-up? Because it'll just distract you and you'll use up ink and lead, and you don't need to write this stuff down on these intro items here, because they're informational. They're not testable. How's that? I know you'd love to hear about them, and I'm going to tell you about them, but don't belabor trying to write it down. So we're going to talk about why government's involved in business, federal government, and how government is involved in business, federal government. There it is, as ever. You can't read it, but that's to motivate you. Okay, well, here, let's flip over to the why overhead or handout or display, whatever it is. It's not overhead, but there it is anyway. Okay, why is government involved in business, federal government? Because of the increasing distance between you and the producer. You know, back in the old days, the butcher, the baker, the candle maker were just right up the street. But now they could be in a whole different state. Heck, they could be in a whole different country. So the idea of increasing distance. And so you see legislation in place to make sure this is federal government. You know, when stuff crosses interstate trade from state to state, then the government, the federal government, can be involved. So interstate, between state kind of transactions, yeah. So the stuff could be made in where the heck, like Pennsylvania or New York or someplace far, far from here. Not the beautiful sunny West Coast covered in smoke. You know, it could be off there someplace. So, you know, what about recourse? What if, you know, the candle maker and the baker and the butcher, whatever, they might not be right up the street. They might be across the country. And so increasing because of that greater distance. So if you're buying, so you got federal standards to make sure you're getting what you're buying, like raisin bread, at least half as much raisins as flour. That's a requirement. If you're going to call it raisin bread, you better have half as much raisins as flour. A 7-inch cherry pie better have 23 cherries in it. Okay, those are some federal standards. Complex products, goods, and services. Yeah, maybe you know a lot about, how about uh, electronics, maybe digital cameras. Maybe you know a lot about smartphones. How about nutrition in food products? How about textiles, fabrics? How about lending instruments? Okay, so you think about complex products, goods and services. As that has ramped up, federal government's become involved, changing values to protect the weak, you know, to protect the very old, the very young, the folks that are a taco shy of a fiesta platter. Did I say? I didn't say that. Okay, so that's the idea, you know. So they don't make mistakes and hurt themselves. You suppose these stories are true? Here's this story about the old guy who, here, not this old guy, some other old guy. And the old guy washed his kitty, gave his kitty a bath, and wanted the kitty to dry off quick. So he put the kitty in the microwave to dry off the kitty. And when the old guy saw what happened to the kitty in the microwave, he had a heart attack and died. God, is this a true story? And his heirs sued the manufacturer of the microwave for not labeling it appropriately, making sure the old guy didn't stick the kitty in the microwave. You suppose that stuff's true? I don't know. But that's the idea, to protect those who need protection for whatever reason, age, young and old, other issues they might have. Look at this. Can you read that? This is out of Consumer Reports, this magazine that evaluates. What if I flip it around? You're supposed to focus better on the other. This camera doesn't focus so well. Let's flip it around to the other camera and see if it focuses a little bit better. And of course, it's no difference. Maybe if I held it steady, okay, you can't read it. Here, let me read you a couple. The point of this was the products are down the left column. The warning that was on the product, these are real warnings that were on the product, are down the center. And then the comment thing down the right side there, these were smart remarks made by the folks at the magazine. You know, Consumer Reports does these objective evaluations of product. Smart comments. So like the SpongeBob SquarePants iron-on, it says, do not iron while wearing the shirt. Yeah, what do you think? You better not iron that on when you're wearing the shirt. These are actual disclaimers on the packages. Here, I'll read you a couple others. This was on a shaver, electric shaver, a hair dryer, and a curling iron. Never use while sleeping. And the smart remark is, how did Sleeping Beauty get her look? Here's a cheese pizza. Product becomes hot when cooked. And the smart remark is, and cold when frozen. Hey, a car sunshade. Vehicle should not be driven with sunshade, say that fast, sunshade in the window, or with a paper bag over the driver's head, whatever. Okay, here's a cutting board. Opening with a sharp object may damage the product, but slicing tomatoes won't. Okay, a hamburger press, do not operate when you are tired, because, hey, squishing ground beef takes concentration. The very last one, I don't know if you can read that last one. That last one was on a lamp. It says, never use this lamp around living children. Others are okay, but the living children, you got to watch out for, okay? Never use lamp around, okay. Okay, how far did we get? Changing values, protecting the weak, and then population growth. And the idea here is there's more of us. And so getting concerned about scarce resources in general, but things like, how about clean air and water and quality of life stuff and scarce resource kind of stuff. And so there are some reasons why federal government, and what do you got here? Look at this. This looks like a lightning bolt striking that building. I'm not surprised, probably for good reason. Lightning bolt from above. Okay. All right. That's why you didn't write any of those down, I hope. And then next, after why comes how. How is federal government, is what we're talking about, involved in business? First, they're a watchdog. What's that mean? That means that they're protecting society and consumers from the things that companies do. So you got product safety, environmental impact, employment practices, all this kind of stuff, and setting standards again. Here were a couple. This was Wolfgang Puck. He wanted to, Wolfgang, he has some health food kind of items. He wanted to sell this thing. It had dough like a pizza. You held it like a pizza. It had cheese on it like a pizza. But the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is that who it was? U.S. Department of Agriculture said, no, it was not a pizza. Okay, it had a sourdough crust and honey and toppings, country sausage, herbs, spicy chicken, goat cheese, and even sliced tomatoes. But the U.S. Department of Agriculture would not approve the product because the frozen disc would violate federal regulations that define a pizza as dough-based product containing cheese and tomato sauce. And Wolfgang said, tomato sauce? That cheapens the product. That's a cheap image. We use fresh ingredients, he said. Finally, Wolfgang put some pesto, added some chunks of tomato chunks to the basil pesto sauce on the pizza, which wasn't appropriate for hot cuisine kind of applications. But the regulators say that now it's a pizza after you put those. Okay. A watchdog. Here's one on pickles. I mean, sometimes the marketplace changes in the way it likes its products, and the pickle packers international, that's what they're called, wanted to change up some of the, there was 1954 standards, and they wanted to bring them up to date, so 1954. So there was, what they call it? It said 8. The federal government put out a pamphlet on pickles. So you were really getting a pickle, not something else. 8 mind-numbing pages of rules and regulations published recently that pinpointed the perfect pickle and its correct curvature, complete with sketches of what constitutes a crooked specimen. And had definitions like this: the diameter in hole style means the shortest diameter measured transversely to the longitudinal axis at the greatest circumference of the pickle. There you go. I feel a lot better knowing that the federal government's on duty, and if I buy a pickle, it really is a pickle. And if I buy a pizza, I'm not getting something else. Okay, but we digress a little bit here. Okay, so watchdog, protecting society and consumers from what companies do. Number 2, they're a referee. They protect businesses from each other. Okay, protect businesses from each other, and assuring a fair and competitive economic environment, and controls on monopolistic kind of operations, and uniform commercial code stuff, and commercial paper, warehouse receipts, letters of credit, some of this stuff that are kind of standardized to make sure that companies are on a level playing field and they know what's happening, and they're getting what they expect. Next way of how government is involved in business. Hey, They're a tax agent. What do you think? There it is, tax agent. And I guess the only thing to think about here, yeah, it's not just collecting money to run the show, okay? That's part of it. And being fair with the way you collect the money to run the show, you know, like benefits that folks get from different things. Maybe if they get more benefit, maybe they taxed higher, whatever. But besides collecting money to run the show, the way you tax can shape the business environment. It can encourage certain things. It can discourage, you know, places to invest your money. It can discourage places to put your money, depending on the tax codes that are in place. How many pages is it tax codes in general? Like 5,500 pages, something. I don't know. Amazing. Okay, so besides collecting money to run the show as a tax agent, also shaping the business environment by how taxes are applied. And then a last thing, they're a business booster. They promote business. First, you could think about the billions of dollars that the government, state, local, and federal, not just talking federal at this point, state, local, and federal, the billions of dollars that's spent in the marketplace on goods and services. Besides being a business booster in that regard, they also are a booster by things like the Small Business Administration, helping small business make it. Census information that's golden. That's golden source of information for marketers. And it's there collected by the government and available for your use as a business and operation. Well, okay, that was kind of that was the preamble to this topic. Now what I want to do, you know, we're talking about this piece of the environment, the legal, political environment. And what I do, the way I organize this topic is I look at two broad categories of legislation that impacts, there it is, two broad categories of legislation that impact business. One is pro-competition, company to company, and the other is consumer protection, company to consumer and society at large. So legislation, two broad categories of the involvement of federal government in business. And what I do, I start off each of these topics with a look at like back in the seminal, the original, the early impact, involvement, early involvement of government, federal government in these areas. Pro-competition, some back to early days in the US, consumer protection, back to the early days, and kind of bring it forward. So let's see, should we look at this, put this up there? Yeah, we could do that. We're gonna do that. Let's see. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna show you this outline. It's moved from here. And talk about it while it's kind of up there on the screen for you. And so we showed you John. So let's find out what John and the Sherman Antitrust Act were all about. Here's the outline. We'll start with that category. So pro-competition. And the Sherman Antitrust Act was the early involvement of federal government in business. And what was going on that precipitated the senator from Illinois, John Sherman, to put forth this act? Trusts were forming in all sorts of industries. And what's a trust? Firms would pool their resources, managing kind of in common. Agreements were kept in secret. They were combining their efforts. And in different industries, this kind of across the board, this was happening. It happened in the railroad industry with J.P. Morgan. It happened in the petroleum industry with Rockefeller. It happened in the American Sugar, who was the individual? I don't know, sugar refinery. It happened in the tobacco biz with Buck Duke. There's Buck. His name is James Buchanan Duke. Duke University, North Carolina, American Tobacco. I think it was rolled cigarettes. Instead of having to roll your own, rolled cigarettes, and dominating the industry. For instance, in the petroleum industry in 1870, Rockefeller and Standard Oil controlled 5% of the industry. 10 years later, it controlled 85% of the industry. So what did you see happening here? They were forcing small businesses out of business or gobbling them up. They were reducing quality, was the contention, what the consumer received at that end, and raising prices because they're colluding. The competitors were getting together, and you had these, folks just taking over entire industries besides, like Rockefeller, Standard Oil. They were forcing concessions from their suppliers, making it hard for little businesses to keep going, like their suppliers and competitors that were little. So we had that going on. And consumers were upset, small businesses were upset, competitors were upset. And so the Sherman Antitrust Act, 1890, it came into existence, passed with one dissenting vote. So what is the Sherman Antitrust Act? It looks like this. There it is. It says, and Sherman is alive and well today. It said that any agreement among firms in restraint of trade is illegal, like price fixing. We're going to set the price at this level, like restricting output. Hey, let's reduce output, reduce supply, can raise the price, dividing up the market division. I'll take this part of the country, you take that part. Exclusion of competitors, keeping them out, however you do that. Whatever barriers economic barriers, whatever other barriers you put up. That's section 1. Section 2 of Sherman, monopolies and attempts to monopolize are legal. Monopolization, mergers among competitors. Do you see merging competitors examined under Sherman antitrust? How about U.S. Air and, was it American? I got it down here someplace. U.S. Air and American Airlines. How about Dow Chemical and DuPont? Old time rivals? Yeah. Mergers among competitors. And then predatory pricing. What's predatory pricing? I have deep pockets and I can reduce my price and I'm going to suffer, but I can stand it and I can drive you out of business because you can't take it like I can. You don't have deep pockets like I have. That's predatory pricing. The point of the pricing that is used is to drive your competitors out of business. And then after the predation, you increase your prices to above pre-predation levels, okay, and recoup your losses is kind of the idea. Well, okay, there's Sherman. And it kind of laid around. It didn't do that much for years, maybe it's kind of a dead letter almost for like 20 years or so. But, Teddy Roosevelt, 1911, um, had he was in the White House and he was a trust buster and um, ordered American Tobacco and Standard Oil to dissolve of some of their holdings, and J.P. Morgan, rail industry. I mean, so stuff was happening, but it needed reinforcement. It was like the courts were writing law, and so Congress got involved with things and decided to shape things up a little bit by what they did in 1914. Let's see if I got anything else I need to tell you here. Yeah, that's kind of good. And so it was a two-pronged thing they did in 1914. They put more law into place and they put an agency. So you had two watchdogs, okay, so to speak. And a legal one, law, like the Clayton Act, and then an administrative one, an agency, like the Federal Trade Commission. Okay, so first Clayton. Looking back in history, this is the granddaddies is what we're looking at. Granddaddies of law, of federal government involved in business, U.S. business. Granddaddy, Sherman, and then Clayton. And Clayton, 1914. Practices that tend to create a monopoly or weaken or destroy competition are legal because we cherish the idea of a competitive marketplace. So practices were outlawed were certain mergers, yeah. Tying agreements. If you carry this product of mine, you have to carry this other product of mine. That's a tying agreement. Exclusive dealing, and that could be, as long as it doesn't weaken or destroy competition, that could be all right. But that's the point. Does it weaken or destroy competition? Then the idea of exclusive dealing. If you carry my product, you better not carry my competitors. Well, as long as, that can be all right, as long as it's not weakening or destroying competition. And then the idea of interlocking directorships. I don't know if that ever is all right. That's where competitors have the board of directors for a company, and its competitor might have the same people on it, some of the same people. That's probably never all right. So weakening or destroying competition, Clayton. And then the Federal Trade Commission. Can you pronounce those initials? FTC. Note that because the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, is the primary, I think this is safe to say, is the primary federal agency that marketers need to be concerned about. Because what's the FTC do? You'll see here. It prohibits unfair and deceptive business conduct that injures competition, injures competitors, and consumers, or consumers, probably is the way it should be. It monitors for unfair business conduct that injures competition, back up to Sherman stuff, Clayton stuff, but it also gets into consumer protection. So it outlaws false and misleading advertising. It handles labeling and packaging, supplier-dealer relationships, back to exclusive dealing and tying agreements and stuff like that, and a competitive environment in general. So especially where the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, gets into consumer-related issues is where it jumps to the fore with regard to the primary federal agency that marketers need to be concerned about. I think that's safe to say. So So where are we in our outline? Let's see if I got another couple things to do here or not. Another couple things. So here, I think we've dispatched the pro-competition stuff, company to company. And we crossed the boundary there with the FTC that's involved in both pro-competition and consumer protection application. So here on the consumer protection side, we're going down the right-hand side here, going back to granddaddy kind of applications. You know, if you want to, you could take consumer protection back to the days of the Code of Hammurabi, 2000 BC. Here's old school consumer protection. This is from the Code of Hammurabi, 2000 BC. If a builder has built a house for a man and his work is not strong and a house falls in and kills the householder, the builder shall be, what should we do back in those days? It was eye for eye, tooth for tooth, the builder shall be slain. Whoa, that is some heavy duty consumer protection. The Phoenicians, bringing it up more modern, I don't know, what are they, 1000 BC? Eliminated any repeat violators of quality standards by chopping off the whatever. This is, okay, the maker of a defective product. Okay, that's back way too far. Let's bring it up to the power of the pen. How about 1904? Is that right? The power of the pen, 1904? Let's check it out. 1906. I was wrong. Who here, just raise your hand, read a little bit, who knows who Upton Sinclair is? Upton Sinclair. Read a little bit of his expose of the meat packing industry, 1906. What was the name of that book? Expose of the meat packing industry? The Jungle, 1906. And the power of the pen and consumer protection is really kind of interesting. So what did Upton say in 1906? Here's a little excerpt. Some of you read parts of it, maybe a whole thing. There's a quote, 1906, The Jungle. It was based in fact, it was a work of fiction, but it was based in fact, the meatpacking industry in Chicago in particular. There was never the least attention paid to what was cut up for sausage. Hey, what's new? Okay, there would come all the way back from Europe, old sausage that had been rejected and that was moldy and white, and it would be doused with borax and glycerin and dumped in the hoppers and made over again for home consumption. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor in the dirt and sawdust. Have you had your lunch? Okay, don't shut this off. If it were close to lunchtime, do it later on. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor in the dirt and sawdust where workers had tramped and spit uncounted billions of consumption. There's consumption again. Consumption germs. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and the water would leak from the roof and it would drip over it, and thousands of rats would race about on it. ... The packers would put poisoned bread out for them, the rats. They would die, and then the rats, the bread, and the meat would all go into the hoppers together. Okay. Talk about mystery meat, huh? The very same, enough people read that around breakfast time when they're having a nice piece of sausage, that the very same year that that book came out, the Meat Inspection Act was passed, and also the Pure Food and Drug Act. So this is like original, early, granddaddy kind of involvement in the federal government in consumer protection, 1906, Meat Inspection Act, Pure Food and Drug Act. And the power of the pen is kind of interesting in this arena of consumer protection. There are things like there was a book called Your Money's Worth. You know, how are you getting ripped off? This is 1930. There was a book called Hidden Persuaders by a guy named Vance Packard, 1950s. I mean, how you're being manipulated. There was, let's see, where is he? Oh, there he is. Who's this guy? There he is. Who's that guy? Hey, he ran for president once. That's Ralph Nader. And the 1964, is that what it was? 1964 Corvair. He wrote the book Unsafe at Any Speed. 1965, he wrote the book. It must have been about the 64 Corvair. There it is, Ralph Nader. And on the heels of him writing that book about that Corvair, I don't know what it did. It exploded when it got in an accident. Whatever it did, on the heels of that, you think about almost immediately started getting all the car safety legislation and the mountain of legislation in that regard that we have today, kind of coming off of Ralph writing that book, Unsafe at Any Speed. So the power of the pen, an interesting area of impetus to consumer protection legislation. Well, here it mentions John F. Kennedy's Consumer Bill of Rights. And here's what you get with this, and this is enduring. You know, I mean, I think it still applies as much today as when he came up with it back in 1962. What are your rights as a consumer? Number one, am I going too fast? Repeat that. Number one, products should be free from safety hazard. You should have, okay, what's your right? You should have freedom from safety hazards, that the stuff, you know, the blade isn't going to fly off and do you bodily harm, or the stuff you're not going to turn purple and whatever, have some dread physical response to some Medicaid, whatever, okay? Free, you have right. It's a right you have as a consumer. Basic rights. Freedom from safety hazards. Number two, you have a right to be informed, to have information without deceit. You put that in. Right to be informed without deceit. That's number two. Number three, this gets to competition. You have a right to a choice, to a variety. That speaks to pro-competition. So you have a right to a choice, right to a variety. That's number three. Number four, you have a right to be heard. Call that redress. If stuff goes goofy, there's somebody that's going to listen to you. And there are federal consumer protection agencies. I think probably every state has consumer protection agency. So there you go. What are the freedoms? What are the rights? First, Consumer Bill of Rights. First, freedom from safety hazards. Number two, right to be informed. Right. Number three, right to a choice or variety. Number four, right to be heard. Okay. What I want to do is make a couple comments about the FTC. If I emphasize that, I ought to write that on a big piece of paper. FTC, maybe it's a song. You know, the Federal Trade Commission, the primary federal agency that marketers are concerned about. Let's talk a little bit more about them since they're so important. Let me find something here. I'll find it. You won't even know I paused you. So here's some Federal Trade Commission stuff. And of course it was improved. You know, it had the act back in back in history there, but it was improved, and back in 1914 is when it came into place. It was improved in 1930s, where I already mentioned some of these things, but there's pro-competition stuff like promote free and fair competition, guard against unregulated monopolies, so applying Sherman and Clayton, safeguarding the public from false advertising, preventing price discrimination, regulate packaging and labeling, achieve truth in lending. Okay. So investigations conducted by the FTC have led to a number of significant pieces of legislation like fair packaging and labeling, child protection, cigarette labeling, Morrison-Moss Warranty Act, consumer protection, poison prevention, fair credit, all kinds of stuff. Lots of legislation came on the heels of investigations by the FTC. The FTC has the power to order a firm to cease and desist an unfair practice, to divest itself a subsidiary or cancel merger plans, or to even undertake corrective advertising. Years ago, Listerine had to do some corrective advertising because it said it killed germs, and it didn't. And so they had to spend advertising dollars telling people, oh yeah, and by the way, we said it kills germs, but you know what? Not really. So here are a couple things looking at the FTC. Here's a pro-competition one. This was the makers of matzah. What's matzah? Unleavened bread used in Jewish holidays. There were like these three companies, Horowitz Brothers and Margaret Rotten or whatever, Manischewitz, Aaron Strait. They made matzah, and they were all having lunch at the same joint in New York, somewhere in New York, and they're, God, according to they came together, the government says, as participants in a plot to fix the price of Passover matzah. What the heck? Come on. Anyway, that's pro-competition. I don't know what the punchline of that is. I don't have it here, but they were examined under that. FTC, Federal Trade Commission. Here's another one. This was Campbell's Soup. Campbell's Soup ran these ads that appeared in a lot of magazines that said most Campbell's chicken noodle and most of its other soups are low on fat and cholesterol and thus helpful in fighting heart disease. But the ad failed to disclose that soups are high in sodium. So the FTC yesterday, whenever this was written in a so-called administrative complaint, said the company's failure to make the disclosure was deceptive and cease and desist. Knock it off. Okay? Don't do that. So, yeah, here was a corrective advertising. When you think about, there's consumer protection and there's pro-competition at, hi, I've left you back there, haven't I? I am still here, really. See, just to prove it. I'm really here. I'm not just a recording. This was in the state of Washington. Wasn't it state of Washington? I think it was. I think it was. In a $30 million, oh no, this was FTC. Okay, it wasn't just the state of Washington. In a $30 million class action suit filed by the FTC, it determined that there is no credible evidence that airborne products taken as directed, airborne, that stuff you take when you used to be able to fly. We're worried about germs, now we're all, the germs have got the better of us. They got the upper hand. We'll get them, we'll fix them, ultimately. No credible evidence that airborne products taken as directed will reduce the severity or duration of colds or provide any tangible benefit for people who are exposed to germs in crowded places. $30 million class action suit. Yeah, okay. And is the FTC and and Sherman alive and well. Yeah, here was American Airlines and US Air. They were finally allowed to merge, but they're examined very closely under Sherman. Food merger between Cisco Corporation and US Foods, examined. And then Dow, we mentioned Dow and DuPont. So, yeah, FTC involved in consumer protection, FTC involved in pro-competition activities. Okay, let me just check it out here. And I think have I left any turns unstoned on this topic? I think that stones all of them. All right, well, there you go. See you again real soon, I expect. Goodbye.